Zara's claws scraped against the cold metal floor of the detention cell as she paced in tight circles. The neural collar around her neck hummed with threatening energy, a constant reminder that one wrong move would send lightning through her nervous system. She had been a warrior of the HFY Empire for over 2 centuries, feared across 7 star systems for her deadly precision and unwavering loyalty to the throne. Now she was nothing more than a prisoner, bound by alien technology she couldn't break. The humans had captured her during the failed assault on their mining station in the Kepler sector. Her entire strike team had been eliminated, but somehow these soft-skinned creatures had managed to take her alive. It should have been impossible. The HFY were superior in every way, stronger, faster, more intelligent. Their warriors trained from birth to be perfect killing machines. Yet here she was, trapped like some common criminal. The cell door hissed open, and Zara immediately dropped into a combat stance, her amber eyes blazing with fury. A human male entered, carrying what appeared to be a meal tray. He was tall by human standards, with dark hair and steady brown eyes that showed no fear despite facing a predator who could tear him apart in seconds. This puzzled Zara. Every other human she had encountered during the battle had been terrified of her kind. "Good morning," the human said in accented HFY, setting the tray on a small table near the door. "I brought you breakfast." Zara's lip curled back, revealing razor-sharp teeth. "I do not eat human poison," she snarled. The man nodded calmly. "It's not human food. We analyzed your physiology and prepared something suitable for your species. High protein content, minimal plant matter, seasoned with compounds that should be familiar to your palate." This gave Zara pause. No enemy had ever shown such consideration for her needs. It had to be a trick. "You seek to make me weak with kindness before your interrogation begins?" "There won't be an interrogation," the human replied, settling into a chair across from her cell. "My name is David Chun. I'm a xenobiologist assigned to ensure your health and comfort while you're here." "Comfort?" Zara laughed harshly. "I'm a prisoner of war. There is no comfort in defeat." David leaned forward slightly, his expression thoughtful. "You're not actually a prisoner of war. The Terran Federation hasn't formally declared war against the HFY Empire. This was classified as a terrorist attack on civilian infrastructure." Rage flared in Zara's chest. "Terrorist? We are honorable warriors defending our territory from human expansion." "Your territory?" David asked mildly. The mining station was built in neutral space, with permits from the Galactic Commerce Authority. No territorial claims have been filed by any HFY worlds. Zara's claws clenched into fists. The human was twisting facts, making her sound like a common raider instead of a soldier following orders. But something in his tone wasn't mocking or superior. He seemed genuinely confused by the discrepancy. "You know nothing of honor," she spat. "Humans are weak, cowardly creatures who hide behind technology and treaties instead of fighting with strength and skill." David nodded thoughtfully. "That's interesting. Can I ask what you base that assessment on?" The question caught Zara off guard. Every enemy she had faced before had either cowered in terror or responded with angry threats. This human seemed genuinely curious about her perspective. "I've seen your kind in battle," she said after a moment. "You panic when faced with true warriors. You rely on superior numbers and advanced weapons because you lack the courage for personal combat." "That's a fair observation based on your experience," David said. "Though I wonder if you've considered alternative explanations for those tactics." Zara's eyes narrowed. "Speak plainly, human." David gestured to the meal tray. "Would you mind eating while we talk? I'm genuinely concerned about your nutritional needs, and this conversation could take a while." Against her better judgment, Zara found herself moving toward the food. The aroma was surprisingly appealing, reminding her of the raw caliph meat she had enjoyed as a youngling on her homeworld. She tore off a piece with her claws and tasted it carefully, ready to spit it out at the first sign of poison or sedatives. To her surprise, it was delicious. The flavors were complex and satisfying in a way that field rations never were. Someone had put considerable effort into preparing this meal specifically for her physiology. "It's good?" David asked, noticing her expression. Zara nodded grudgingly, then caught herself showing weakness. "It is adequate." David smiled slightly. I'm glad. Now, about those alternative explanations, have you considered that what looks like cowardice might actually be efficiency? Explain. Well, from a human perspective, why would we choose to fight with inferior tactics when superior ones are available? If the goal is to achieve victory with minimal casualties on both sides, wouldn't it be more logical to use advanced weapons and coordinated strategies? Zara paused in her eating. Victory without honor is meaningless. But what if honor means something different to humans than it does to Kethvar? David asked. What if we define honor as protecting our people and accomplishing our objectives with the least possible loss of life? This concept was so alien to Zara's worldview that she struggled to process it. Among her people, honor came from personal prowess in combat, from facing death without fear, from proving individual strength against worthy opponents. The idea that avoiding battle could be honorable was completely foreign. You speak of preserving life as if it has value beyond service, she said slowly. David's expression grew serious. Every life has value beyond service. Every person has hopes, dreams, relationships, potential contributions to make. When someone dies, all of that is lost forever. Weakness, Zara muttered, but with less conviction than before. Is it? David asked. Let me ask you something. Why did you become a warrior? I was bred for war, selected for my genetic advantages, and trained from birth to serve the Empire. But why did you personally choose to embrace that role? You could have resisted, rebelled, found another path. Zara's claws tightened on the food. To protect my people, to ensure the survival and dominance of the Kethvar. So you fight to preserve your civilization, your way of life, your species? Yes. Then we have the same goal, David said quietly. We both fight to protect what we value. We just have different methods and different definitions of what's worth protecting. Zara stared at him for a long moment. No enemy had ever spoken to her like this before, treating her as an equal worthy of philosophical discussion rather than a beast to be caged or killed. It was deeply unsettling. You were trying to confuse me with words, she accused. No, David said simply. I'm trying to understand you. And I'm hoping you might try to understand us. Why? What purpose does understanding serve when we are enemies? David was quiet for several seconds, seeming to consider his words carefully. Because maybe we don't have to be enemies. Maybe the conflict between our peoples is based on misunderstandings that could be resolved through communication instead of violence. Zara laughed bitterly. Your people invaded our space, built your colonies on worlds we consider sacred, disrupted trade routes that have existed for millennia. You think words can undo those insults? Sacred worlds? David leaned forward with genuine interest. I wasn't aware of any religious significance. Our colonial surveys showed no signs of active settlement or territorial markers. Of course you saw no markers, Zara snapped. Sacred sites are not to be defiled with crude monuments. They are preserved in their natural state, visited only during holy ceremonies that occur once every solar cycle. David pulled out a small tablet and began making notes. Which world specifically? If we can identify sites of religious importance, we could potentially establish protected zones or negotiate shared usage agreements. Zara blinked in surprise. You would negotiate? Of course. The Federation has policies specifically designed to respect indigenous rights and religious freedoms. If we inadvertently violated sacred sites, we want to make amends. But you are the enemy, Zara protested, feeling increasingly confused. Why would you show consideration for enemy beliefs? Because they're not just enemy beliefs, David said gently. They're your beliefs. And you're not just an enemy. You're a sentient being with a rich culture and valid concerns about how your people are being affected by human expansion. Zara set down the food, her appetite suddenly gone. Everything this human said contradicted what she had been taught about his species. According to Kethvar intelligence, humans were ruthless expansionists who destroyed everything in their path, showing no respect for other cultures or ways of life. But David spoke as if human policy actively sought to avoid such conflicts. I was told your kind shows no mercy, she said slowly. Who told you that? My commanders. The Empire's intelligence network. We have extensive files on human military capabilities and cultural practices. David nodded thoughtfully. And those files indicate that humans are merciless in war. Yes, they say you torture prisoners for information, execute civilians who resist occupation, and strip conquered worlds of all resources. That's not accurate, David said carefully. At least, not a standard policy. Individual humans might commit such acts. We're not perfect as a species, but the Federation Military Code explicitly forbids torture, requires protection of civilians, and has environmental protection protocols for all settled worlds. Zara studied his face intently, using her enhanced senses to detect signs of deception. But his heartbeat remained steady, his scent unchanged, his body language open and honest. Either he was an exceptionally skilled liar, or he genuinely believed what he was saying. Then, why do my people believe otherwise? She asked. I don't know, David admitted, but I'd like to find out. Would you be willing to share some of those intelligence files with me? Not for military purposes, he added quickly, seeing her expression, but to understand where these misconceptions might be coming from. Zara was quiet for a long time, torn between her loyalty to the Empire and a growing curiosity about this strange human who treated her with such unexpected respect. Finally, she spoke. The neural collar prevents me from accessing classified information directly, but I could describe what I remember if... She trailed off, unsure how to voice what she wanted. If what? David prompted gently. If you would tell me the truth about human intentions in Kethvar space. Not propaganda or political rhetoric. The truth. David considered this carefully. I can tell you what I know to be true based on my own experiences and the policy documents I've read. But I should warn you that my perspective is limited. I'm a scientist, not a politician or military strategist. There may be aspects of human policy that I'm not aware of. That is more honesty than any enemy has ever shown me, Zara said quietly. Maybe that's because I don't see you as an enemy, David replied. I see you as someone who loves her people enough to fight for them, even against overwhelming odds. That's not something to hate. It's something to respect. Zara felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of tension she hadn't even realized she was carrying. For the first time since her capture, she didn't feel like a caged animal waiting for slaughter. She felt like a person engaged in genuine conversation with another person. Very well, she said finally. I will share what I can remember. But I want to understand something first. What? Why are you doing this? Why spend time talking with a captured enemy instead of simply extracting information through force or drugs? David smiled sadly. Because force and drugs don't create understanding. They create fear and resentment. If we want to build a lasting peace between our peoples, we need to start with honest communication and mutual respect. You truly believe peace is possible? I have to, David said simply, because the alternative is too terrible to accept. Zara looked at this human, this David Chun, and saw something she had never expected to find in an enemy. She saw hope. Not the desperate hope of a doomed cause, but the patient hope of someone who believed that even the deepest conflicts could be resolved through understanding and compassion. For the first time in her adult life, she began to wonder if everything she had been taught about humans might be wrong. The meal sat half-finished on the table between them, but neither seemed to notice. They were both too focused on the possibility that their people's long conflict might not be as inevitable as everyone believed. Outside the detention center, the human space station continued its slow rotation around the disputed mining asteroid. But inside that small cell, something new was beginning to grow, a fragile bridge of understanding between two species who had been killing each other for decades. Zara didn't know it yet, but her world was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. And it would all begin with learning to see her captor not as an enemy to be defeated, but as a person to be understood. 3 days had passed since Zara's first real conversation with David Chun, and she found herself looking forward to his visits with an anticipation that disturbed her. Each morning, he arrived with carefully prepared meals and questions that challenged everything she thought she knew about humans. Each evening, She lay on a narrow cot in her cell, staring at the ceiling and trying to reconcile his words with a lifetime of military conditioning. This morning, David entered carrying not just food, but also a portable holographic projector. He set up the device on the small table and activated it, creating a three-dimensional star map floating in the air between them. "I wanted to show you something," he said, manipulating the display to focus on the border region between human and Kethvar space. "These are the disputed territories where most of our conflicts have occurred." Zara approached the hologram cautiously, studying the familiar star patterns. Red markers indicated sites of recent battles, while blue markers showed human settlements, and green ones represented known Kethvar outposts. "What am I supposed to see?" she asked. David highlighted a cluster of systems near the center of the disputed zone. "Notice anything unusual about the pattern of conflicts?" Zara examined the data more closely, her enhanced vision picking up details that might escape human perception. After several minutes, she began to see what David was pointing toward. "The battles are concentrated around resource-rich systems," she observed, "but not the ones with the highest strategic value." "Exactly," David said, clearly pleased that she had noticed. "And look at this." He overlaid another data layer, showing trade routes and shipping manifests. "Most of the systems we've fought over don't have significant military importance to either side, but they're all located along major commercial shipping lanes." Zara's eyes narrowed as she processed this information. "You're suggesting that someone else is manipulating our conflicts?" "I'm suggesting that the pattern doesn't make sense if our governments are making rational strategic decisions," David replied carefully. "But it makes perfect sense if someone profits from keeping U.S. at war." The implications hit Zara like a physical blow. She had always assumed that the Empire's military leadership was directing their forces against legitimate threats to Kethvar security. The idea that their battles might be serving someone else's interests was almost too terrible to contemplate. "Who would benefit from our mutual destruction?" she asked, though part of her already suspected the answer. David manipulated the hologram again, highlighting shipping records and corporate registrations. "There are several interstellar corporations that have been buying up mining rights and salvage contracts and systems affected by the war. They profit both from the chaos that drives down property values and from the military contracts for weapons and supplies." Zara studied the data, her analytical mind automatically cataloging patterns and connections. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. Corporate entities with ties to both human and Kethvar black market networks had indeed positioned themselves to profit from the ongoing conflict. "This could be fabricated," she said, though without much conviction. "It could be," David agreed, "but you can verify some of it independently. The corporate registrations are public records, and the shipping manifest would be available through Kethvar commercial databases." Zara was quiet for a long time, processing not just the information, but the fact that David was sharing it with her. If he was telling the truth, this data could fundamentally change how her people understood the war. If he was lying, he was taking an enormous risk by showing her fabricated intelligence that could be easily disproven. "Why show me this?" she finally asked. "Because you have a right to know if you've been fighting and dying for someone else's profit," David said simply. "And because your people deserve to make informed decisions about their future, even if that knowledge might help the Kethvar Empire defeat humanity." David met her gaze directly. "Even then, truth is more important than tactical advantage." Zara felt that strange loosening sensation in her chest again, as if invisible bonds were slowly breaking. Among her people, information was power, carefully hoarded and strategically deployed. The idea that someone would share valuable intelligence simply because it was the right thing to do was almost incomprehensible. "Your commanders would call you a traitor for sharing this with an enemy," she observed. "Probably," David agreed with a slight smile. "But you're not my enemy anymore, Zara. You're someone who deserves to understand what's really happening to her people." The casual use of her name sent an unexpected warmth through Zara's system. Throughout her career, she had been addressed by rank or designation number. Only her blood siblings had ever used her personal name, and they had died in the war years ago. Hearing it spoken with such familiarity and respect by a member of another species was deeply affecting. I need to think about this, she said, stepping back from the hologram. David nodded and began packing up the projector. Take all the time you need. I'll leave you to process the information. Wait, Zara called as he reached the door. Yesterday, you mentioned that humans have policies to protect indigenous rights. How does that work in practice? David paused, considering his answer. It varies depending on the situation. When we encounter pre-spaceflight civilizations, we have strict non-interference protocols. For spacefaring species like yours, we try to establish formal diplomatic relations and negotiate treaties that respect existing territorial claims. But the Kethvar Empire has never received any formal diplomatic overtures from the Federation, Zara protested. Are you certain about that? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Zara realized that she only knew what her military commanders had told her about human Kethvar relations. She had never seen diplomatic correspondence or treaty negotiations herself. I only know what I was told during mission briefings, she admitted. David's expression grew thoughtful. What if I told you that the Federation has sent over 40 diplomatic missions to various Kethvar worlds in the past decade, all seeking to establish formal relations and negotiate territorial agreements? Zara's blood ran cold. That's impossible. If humans had attempted diplomacy, the Empire would have responded appropriately. Maybe they did respond, David said quietly. Just not in the way that would benefit people like you and me. The implications were staggering. If human diplomatic missions had been systematically concealed from the Kethvar population, it would mean that their leaders had chosen war over negotiation. It would mean that thousands of warriors had died in battles that might never have been necessary. I need proof, Zara said, her voice barely above a whisper. I can get you proof, David promised. But first, I need you to understand something important. The information I'm sharing with you isn't just about exposing lies. It's about finding a way forward that doesn't require endless killing. What do you mean? David sat back down, his expression serious. The neural collar you're wearing isn't just a control device. It's also a communication system. With the right modifications, it could allow you to contact Kethvar space directly. Zara's hand instinctively went to her throat, feeling the cold metal band that had been her constant torment. You would give me access to communications? Why? Because if what we suspect is true, then both our peoples are being manipulated into a war that serves only corporate interests. The only way to stop it is for someone on the Kethvar side to expose the truth to your own people. And you think they would believe a captured warrior who has been in human custody for days? Zara asked skeptically. They might, if you could provide them with verifiable proof of the deception. And if you had credible witnesses to support your claims. Zara studied David's face, trying to understand what he was really proposing. What witnesses? Other Kethvar prisoners who have been kept in different facilities. Military personnel who might have noticed discrepancies in their orders or intelligence briefings. Maybe even some of your own commanders who have begun to question the strategic logic of recent campaigns. The scope of what David was suggesting began to dawn on Zara. He wasn't just talking about exposing a conspiracy. He was proposing to help her organize a resistance movement within her own military structure. You would risk your career, your freedom, perhaps your life, to help me convince my people that this war is based on lies, she asked. Yes, David said without hesitation. Why? David was quiet for a long moment, seemingly struggling to find the right words. Because I've seen what this war is doing to both our peoples. I've treated wounded soldiers from both sides, human and Kethvar. I've watched good people die for causes they don't understand, fighting enemies they've never been allowed to truly know. He gestured toward the space between them. These past few days, talking with you, have shown me something I'd never seen before. A Kethvar warrior who isn't a monster or a faceless enemy, but a person with thoughts and feelings and valid concerns about her people's welfare. If I can see that in you, then maybe others can learn to see it too. Zara felt something break inside her chest. Not the loosening sensation she had experienced before, but an actual fracture in the wall she had built around her emotions. For nearly 3 centuries, she had defined herself as a weapon in service to the Empire. She had suppressed every personal feeling, every individual desire, in favor of duty and obedience. But this human saw her as a person first and a warrior second. He spoke to her as an equal, respected her intelligence, and trusted her with information that could change the course of the war. For the first time in her life, someone was asking her to think for herself rather than simply follow orders. "If I agree to help you," she said slowly, "I would be committing treason against the Empire, or you would be serving the Empire's true interests by exposing those who have been exploiting it," David countered. Zara considered this perspective. Her oath of loyalty was to the Kethvar people and their rightful rulers, not to any individual commander or corporate interest that might be manipulating them. If the current leadership was sacrificing warriors for profit rather than genuine security needs, then opposing them might actually be the highest form of loyalty. "I need to see the proof you mentioned," she decided. "All of it. Diplomatic records, corporate connections, shipping manifests, everything." David smiled, and Zara realized it was the first truly genuine smile she had seen from him. "I'll arrange access to the full database. But I should warn you, once you see the evidence, you won't be able to go back to believing the simple version of events you were taught." "Good," Zara said firmly. "I'm tired of simple versions. I want the truth, no matter how complex or uncomfortable it might be. Even if the truth shows that some of your own people are complicit in the deception." Zara's claws clenched involuntarily, but her voice remained steady. "Especially then, if members of our leadership have betrayed the warriors they command, they must be exposed and held accountable." David nodded approvingly. "There's something else you should know. The modifications to your neural collar won't just allow communication. They'll also give you access to encrypted Kethvar military networks. You'll be able to see classified reports and operational orders in real time." "That seems like an enormous security risk for you to take," Zara observed. "It is," David admitted. "But it's also the only way you'll be able to verify that the information I'm showing you isn't fabricated. You'll have independent access to your own people's records." Zara was struck by the elegance of this solution. By giving her the ability to fact-check his claims through her own military's databases, David was demonstrating his confidence in the truth of what he was telling her. No one would take such a risk if they were lying. "When do we begin?" she asked. "Tomorrow morning. I'll need tonight to arrange the technical modifications and compile the full evidence package." As David prepared to leave, Zara called after him once more. "David, if this goes wrong, if my people refuse to believe the evidence, or if your superiors discover what you're doing, what happens to you?" David paused at the door, his hand on the control panel. "I'll probably face court-martial for treason, spend the rest of my life in prison, and be remembered as a traitor who gave military secrets to the enemy. Doesn't that frighten you?" David turned back to face her, his expression peaceful. Not as much as the thought of watching good people continue dying for a lie. After he left, Zara lay on her cot and stared at the ceiling, her mind racing with possibilities and implications. Tomorrow would bring either the beginning of a new understanding between their peoples or the confirmation that this kind human was an exceptional individual whose hopes for peace were doomed to disappointment. But tonight, for the first time since her capture, Zara felt something she had almost forgotten existed: hope. The neural collar hummed softly around her throat, no longer feeling like a symbol of her captivity, but like a potential bridge to a future where Kethvar and human children might grow up without learning to hate each other. Outside her cell, the space station continued its eternal dance around the mining asteroid, but inside, a former enemy was beginning to see the possibility of becoming an ally in the fight for truth and peace. The modified neural collar felt different against Zara's skin. Where before it had been a cold reminder of captivity, now it hummed with potential. David had spent the morning carefully reprogramming its systems, his hands steady despite the risk he was taking. If discovered, his actions would be seen as the worst kind of treason, giving an enemy prisoner access to sensitive military networks. "The encryption protocols are standard Kethvar military," David explained as he made final adjustments to the device. "You should be able to access everything from field reports to command communications. The Federation databases are on a separate channel, I've loaded the diplomatic records, corporate data, and shipping manifests we discussed. Zara flexed her claws nervously. How long do we have before someone notices the modifications? The collar's original monitoring functions are still active, so security will see normal readings. But if you access classified networks, there's always a chance the traffic will be detected. David finished his work and stepped back. Are you ready? Zara closed her eyes and activated the collar's communication system. Immediately, her consciousness expanded beyond the confines of the cell as streams of data flowed through her enhanced neural pathways. The sensation was overwhelming at first, like drinking from a waterfall after days of thirst. Gradually, she learned to filter the information flow, focusing first on recent military dispatches from the front lines. What she found made her stomach clench with growing horror. The casualty reports, she whispered, her eyes still closed. 3 entire strike battalions lost in the Centauri sector alone. That's over 1,500 warriors dead in a single campaign. What was the stated objective of that campaign? David asked gently. Zara accessed the operational orders, her enhanced memory cataloging every detail. Disruption of human supply lines and seizure of strategic mining facilities. She paused, cross-referencing with the corporate data David had provided. But, according to the shipping manifests, those facilities were already scheduled for decommission. The ore deposits had been exhausted months before our attack. 1,500 warriors died to capture worthless infrastructure, David observed sadly. It gets worse. Zara's voice was barely audible as she dove deeper into the classified records. The intelligence briefings that justified the attack came from a single source, a corporate entity called Meridian Strategic Solutions. They provided targeting data, enemy strength estimates, and tactical recommendations. David pulled up his own records on the holographic projector. Meridian Strategic Solutions is owned by a consortium of human and HFY investors. They've been buying salvage rights to battlefields throughout the war zone. Zara opened her eyes, her amber gaze burning with fury. They sent my people to die so they could profit from the wreckage. I'm afraid so. And this is just one example. The pattern repeats across dozens of engagements over the past 5 years. Zara stood abruptly, pacing to the far wall of her cell. Her claws scraped against the metal as she fought to control her rage. How many warriors have died for their profit? David consulted his records, though his reluctance to answer was clear. Based on the operational patterns we've identified, probably 30 to 40,000 HFY casualties. Similar numbers on the human side. The magnitude of the betrayal staggered Zara. She had lost friends, mentors, subordinates, all of them dying in battles that served no legitimate military purpose. Their deaths had been orchestrated by faceless corporations seeking to maximize their profit margins. I need to contact the Empire, she said, her voice deadly calm. The High Command must be informed. Wait, David cautioned. Look at the communications logs first. See who's been receiving reports from Meridian Strategic Solutions. Zara accessed the command hierarchy data, tracing communication patterns between corporate entities and military leadership. What she found made her knees weak. General Kethros, she breathed. He's been receiving regular payments from companies linked to Meridian. And Admiral Vextal. Even High Commander Zarthek has financial ties to these corporations. How high does it go? David asked. To the top, Zara said, her world crumbling around her. The entire senior command structure is compromised. They've been selling warrior lives for profit. David moved closer to the cell barrier, his expression compassionate. I know this is devastating, but now you understand why simply reporting to your superiors won't work. They're part of the conspiracy. Zara slumped against the wall, feeling more defeated than she ever had in actual battle. Then what can we do? If the leadership is corrupt and the rank and file warriors don't know they're being manipulated, how can we stop it? By going around the chain of command, David suggested. There have to be honest officers at the middle levels, people with enough authority to investigate, but not enough rank to be bought off by the corporations. Zara considered this, her tactical mind automatically analyzing possibilities. Captain Dexmar of the Void Stalker. She's commanded my unit for 20 years. I've never known her to put profit above honor. and Commander Thalvan of the Outer Patrol. He's lost too many friends to these senseless battles. He might be willing to listen. Can you contact them directly? Yes, but they'll need proof. Accusations against the High Command aren't something that can be made lightly. David activated the holographic projector again, this time displaying a comprehensive evidence package. Take all of it. Financial records, communication intercepts, operational analyses showing the strategic meaninglessness of recent campaigns. Everything an honest investigation would need. Zara stared at the data compilation, realizing that David had prepared this package before even asking for her help. You were planning to give me this information regardless of whether I agreed to cooperate. Yes, David admitted, because your people deserve to know the truth, even if it means they become more effective enemies of humanity. You would rather face honest enemies than manipulated ones. Every time, David said firmly. At least then, we'd be fighting over real disagreements instead of manufactured conflicts. Zara began uploading the evidence files to encrypted storage locations within the Kethvar military network, using her knowledge of security protocols to hide them where only specific individuals could find them. As she worked, she became aware that David was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite identify. What? She asked. I was just thinking about how remarkable this is, David said. A few days ago, we were enemies. Now we're working together to expose the people who profit from our hatred. Do you regret it? Taking this risk for someone you barely know. David smiled. Not for a moment. You know what I regret? All the time we wasted being afraid of each other instead of talking to each other. Zara felt that familiar loosening sensation in her chest, but this time she recognized it for what it was, the dissolution of prejudices that had shaped her entire worldview. I was taught that humans were incapable of honor or compassion, and I was taught that Kethvar were bloodthirsty savages who couldn't be reasoned with, David replied. It's amazing how much easier it is to kill people when you don't see them as people. Is that what this is about? Making it harder for our peoples to kill each other? Partly, but it's also about something more fundamental. David leaned against the wall across from her cell. Every sentient species I've studied has the capacity for both cruelty and compassion. The difference is usually which one their society encourages. Zara finished uploading the evidence and began composing carefully worded messages to her trusted contacts. What do you think will happen when this information reaches honest officers? I don't know, David admitted. Best case scenario, they investigate quietly and expose the corruption within your command structure. Worst case, they report up the chain and we've just signed death warrants for everyone involved. Including yourself. Including myself. Zara paused in her message composition, studying David's face. You're not afraid of dying for this cause. No more than you are. But I'm a warrior. I was trained to accept death in service to my people. You're a scientist. You could have stayed safely in your laboratory and avoided this entire situation. David was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider his response. Do you know what I studied before I became a xenobiologist? No. History. Specifically, the history of interspecies conflicts. I've read about hundreds of wars between different peoples, and they all follow similar patterns. Mutual fear leads to hostility. Hostility leads to dehumanization, and dehumanization makes atrocities possible. Zara listened intently, beginning to understand what drove this unusual human. The only way to break the cycle, David continued, is for someone to take the first step toward understanding, to see the other side as people rather than monsters. That's what you did when you agreed to listen to me. That's what I'm doing by helping you expose the truth, even if it costs you everything, especially then. The most important choices are often the ones that cost us the most. Zara sent her messages and leaned back against the wall, feeling emotionally drained but oddly hopeful. How long before we know if anyone will respond? Could be hours, could be days. In the meantime, there's something else I wanted to discuss with you. What? David manipulated the holographic display to show personnel records and ship deployments. We've identified the locations of other Kethvar prisoners being held by the Federation. If this investigation moves forward, you'll need supporting testimony from other witnesses. Zara studied the data, recognizing several names from her own unit. Vector and Theles. They were captured in the same engagement as me. Are they? alive and unharmed. They're being held at research stations similar to this one. If we can arrange for them to access the same evidence you've seen, they would corroborate my testimony, Zara finished. But how could such communications be arranged without alerting Federation security? David smiled mysteriously. Leave that to me. Let's just say that there are other humans who share my views about the futility of endless war. A conspiracy of peacemakers. Something like that. The question is, are you prepared to take this all the way? Once we start contacting other prisoners and building a case, there's no going back. Your entire life will change. Zara thought about her life before capture. Endless battles against enemies she had never been allowed to understand, following orders from commanders who apparently cared more about profit than the lives of their warriors, serving an empire that had been systematically deceived about the nature of the war they were fighting. My life has already changed, she said finally. The question is whether I have the courage to help change others' lives as well. David's smile was warm and genuine. I think you do. In fact, I'm certain of it. As if summoned by his confidence, an encrypted message appeared on Zara's neural display. Her eyes widened as she read the sender identification. Captain Dexmar, she whispered. She's responding already. What does she say? Zara opened the message, her expression growing increasingly amazed as she read. She says she's been conducting her own investigation into operational irregularities. She has questions about recent mission parameters and wants to meet with me personally. That's incredible. How soon? She's requesting permission to visit this facility under the pretext of prisoner interrogation. She could be here within 2 days. David clasped his hands together, his excitement barely contained. This could be the beginning of everything we hoped for, or the end of everything we've worked toward, Zara cautioned. If she's been compromised, or if this is a trap, then we'll face whatever comes together, David said simply. But I believe in what we're doing. And, more importantly, I believe in you. Zara felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. For the first time in her adult life, someone saw her not as a weapon to be deployed or an enemy to be defeated, but as a person worthy of trust and respect. David, she said softly. Yes. Thank you for showing me that enemies can become allies, for proving that understanding is possible even across species barriers, for risking everything to help my people see the truth. David met her gaze through the cell barrier, his expression serious but hopeful. Thank you for having the courage to listen when everything you've been taught told you not to. That's the bravest thing I've ever witnessed. Outside the detention center, the space station continued its slow rotation, but inside, 2 former enemies had begun something that might just change the course of galactic history. The real test would come when Captain Dexmar arrived. Then, they would learn whether the bonds of understanding they had forged were strong enough to withstand the scrutiny of the wider universe. Captain Dexmar's arrival at the Federation research station sent ripples of tension through the facility. Zara could sense the unease among the human guards as they processed a request for a high-ranking Kethvar officer to interview a prisoner. Such exchanges were rare and typically preceded either prisoner releases or major diplomatic incidents. Zara watched through her cell's observation portal as Dexmar was escorted through the station's corridors. Her former captain moved with the same deadly grace that had made her legendary among the fleet, but Zara noticed something different in her bearing, a weariness that spoke of too many losses and too many unanswered questions. David had insisted on being present for the meeting, claiming his role as xenobiologist gave him authority to monitor prisoner interactions. The truth was simpler. He was as nervous about this encounter as Zara was. Everything they had worked toward would depend on how Dexmar reacted to the evidence they had compiled. The cell door hissed open, and Dexmar entered alone, having dismissed her escorts with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. She was smaller than Zara remembered, but her presence still filled the space with quiet command. Her amber eyes, so similar to Zara's own, swept the room with tactical assessment before settling on the prisoner. Warrior Zura, Dexmar said formally, using the traditional greeting between soldiers of equal standing. Captain, Zara responded, surprised by how much emotion the simple exchange carried. Here was someone from her old life, a reminder of who she had been before everything changed. Dexmar's gaze shifted to David, who stood quietly near the door. "You are the human scientist mentioned in the facility reports." "Dr. David Chun," he replied with a respectful nod. "I've been serving as cultural liaison during Zara's detention." Cultural liaison. Dexmar's tone suggested she found the term amusing. An interesting euphemism. "Tell me, Dr. Chun, what culture have you been learning about?" David met her challenging stare calmly. "The culture of a people who value honor above survival, who fight with courage even when outnumbered, and who deserve to know when they're being betrayed by those they trust." Dexmar's eyes narrowed slightly, but Zara caught the subtle shift in her posture that indicated surprise rather than hostility. "Betrayed? That's a serious accusation." "It's also an accurate one," Zara interjected. She activated her modified neural collar, projecting the evidence files into the room's holographic display system. "Captain, I need you to see something." For the next 2 hours, Zara walked Dexmar through the compiled evidence. Financial records showing payments to senior commanders. Operational orders that made no strategic sense. Corporate entities profiting from battlefield salvage. Communication intercepts revealing the artificial nature of many recent conflicts. Dexmar listened in absolute silence, her expression growing darker as the scope of the deception became clear. When Zara finished her presentation, the captain sat motionless for several minutes, processing what she had learned. "The Helix Nebula campaign," Dexmar finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I lost 18 warriors taking that asteroid field. 18 good soldiers who died because I believe the intelligence reports about human weapon caches." "The caches that were never found?" Zara asked gently. "Because they never existed. The entire operation was designed to create casualties." Dexmar's claws slowly extended as her anger built. "And the Crimson Ridge massacre, where we lost an entire company trying to hold territory that turned out to be worthless?" "Orchestrated by the same corporate interests," David confirmed, highlighting the relevant data. "Your people died to drive up the cost of mining operations in that sector." Dexmar stood abruptly, her warriors bearing radiating controlled fury. "How long has this been going on?" "Based on the patterns we can identify, at least 5 years," Zara replied. "Possibly longer." 5 years. Dexmar began pacing, her movements precise despite her obvious emotional turmoil. 5 years of sending warriors to die for corporate profit margins. 5 years of believing we were defending the Empire when we were actually feeding a war machine designed to consume us. She stopped suddenly, turning to face David. "Why show us this? What do humans gain from exposing their own allies in this conspiracy?" David's response was immediate and sincere. "We gain the possibility of ending a war that's destroying both our peoples. Some humans are profiting from this conflict, but most of us are dying in it just like your warriors. You expect me to believe that humans care about Kethvar casualties? I expect you to believe that some humans care about unnecessary casualties regardless of species," David replied. "Just as some Kethvar might care about ending senseless violence, even if it means questioning their own leadership." Dexmar studied his face for a long moment, her enhanced senses analyzing his biological responses for signs of deception. "You speak as if peace between our peoples is possible, isn't it?" Zara asked, drawing her captain's attention. "We're having this conversation without trying to kill each other. We're working together to uncover truth. If we can do it, why not others? Because the corporate interests that profit from war won't simply allow peace to break out," Dexmar said pragmatically. "They have too much invested in maintaining the conflict." David activated another display, showing corporate structure analyses and financial projections. "Actually, that's not necessarily true. The war profiteering model depends on sustained low-level conflict. A genuine resolution that opened up legitimate trade and development opportunities could be far more profitable in the long term, assuming the right people are positioned to benefit from peace instead of war," Dexmar observed shrewdly. "Exactly, which is why this can't just be about exposing corruption. It has to be about building alternative power structures that have incentives for cooperation instead of conflict." Zara watched this exchange with growing amazement. Her captain and her former enemy were discussing complex geopolitical strategy as equals, finding common ground in their desire to serve their people's genuine interests. It was precisely the kind of dialogue that military doctrine insisted was impossible. What do you propose? Dexmar asked David directly. A multi-stage approach. First, we need to identify honest officers on both sides who can investigate and expose the corruption within their own command structures. Second, we establish back-channel communications between reformist elements to coordinate actions. Third, we build evidence packages that can be released simultaneously across both territories, making it impossible for the corrupt leadership to suppress or discredit the information. Dexmar nodded slowly. A coordinated revelation designed to create pressure for systemic reform rather than just personnel changes. And then? Then, we hope that enough people on both sides prefer truth to comfortable lies, David said simply. Dexmar was quiet for several minutes, clearly weighing the enormous risks and potential consequences of what they were discussing. Finally, she turned to Zara. You trust this human completely? Zara met her captain's gaze without hesitation. With my life, with the future of our people. He's shown more honor in these few days than our own commanders have shown in years. That's a remarkable transformation for someone who is trained to see humans as monsters. Maybe I was wrong about humans. Maybe we've all been wrong about a lot of things. Dexmar nodded thoughtfully, then activated her own communication systems. I'm going to contact Commander Thalvin and Admiral Kexdow. They've been asking the same questions I have about recent operational parameters. If they're willing to listen, they'll join the investigation? Zara asked hopefully. They'll demand answers. And if the answers confirm what we've learned here, they'll want justice. David leaned forward intently. How many honest officers do you think might be willing to act on this information? More than you might expect, Dexmar replied. Military personnel notice when their orders don't make strategic sense. They notice when good soldiers die for unclear objectives. They notice when victory conditions seem designed to be unachievable. But they've lacked a framework for understanding why those things were happening, Zara added. Exactly. This evidence provides that framework. It explains why nothing we've done in this war has felt like genuine military progress. As Dexmar began composing encrypted messages to her contacts, David pulled Zara aside for a private conversation. How do you think she's handling this? He asked quietly. Better than I expected. But then, Dexmar has always been more interested in truth than convenient answers. That's what made her a good captain. And that's what will make her a good ally in this effort. Zara considered the question carefully. I think so. But, David, you need to understand something about Kethvar culture. Once we commit to a course of action, we pursue it without compromise. If Dexmar decides to expose this conspiracy, she'll see it through to the end regardless of personal cost. Is that a warning or a promise? Both. She'll be absolutely committed to success, but she'll also expect the same level of commitment from everyone else involved. David nodded, understanding. And if the investigation reveals that the corruption goes even deeper than we've discovered, then she'll want to root it out completely, no matter how high it reaches or how many people get implicated. Good. Half measures won't solve this problem anyway. Dexmar finished her communications and rejoined them. I have responses from both Thalvin and Kexdow. They want to examine the evidence personally. Can that be arranged? David asked. I've requested permission to transfer Zara to a secure military facility where proper interrogation protocols can be followed. It's a reasonable request that shouldn't raise suspicions. Zara felt a chill of apprehension. And if someone in the command structure suspects what we're really doing, then we'll discover exactly how deep the corruption goes, Dexmar said grimly. But we can't expose the conspiracy without taking some risks. David stood up, his decision clearly made. I'm coming with you. Both Kethvar looked at him in surprise. That's not possible, Dexmar objected. No human has ever been granted access to a Kethvar military facility. Then this will be a first. If you're taking Zara into a potentially dangerous situation, she should have someone there who can verify that any confessions or testimony were given freely rather than under coercion. Zara felt a warmth in her chest at David's determination to protect her, but she also recognized the enormous risk he was proposing to take. David, if something goes wrong, you could be imprisoned or executed as a spy. And if I stay here while you face danger alone, I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I was a coward when it mattered most. Dexmar studied David with new respect. You would place yourself at the mercy of people you've been trained to see as enemies. I would place myself at the mercy of people I've learned to see as potential allies, David corrected. Very well, Dexmar decided. I'll include a request for human observer presence in the interrogation proceedings. If the request is approved, it will actually strengthen our position by demonstrating transparency. And if it's denied, then we'll know that someone doesn't want outside witnesses to what we're planning to reveal. As they finalized the arrangement for transfer to Kethvar custody, Zara realized that her world had changed in ways she was still discovering. A week ago, she had been a simple warrior following orders without question. Now she was part of a conspiracy that might reshape the relationship between two civilizations. But the most profound change wasn't political or strategic, it was personal. For the first time in her life, she was making decisions based on her own moral judgment rather than military doctrine. And she was making those decisions in partnership with beings she had been taught to hate. The neural collar around her throat no longer felt like a symbol of captivity. It had become a bridge between worlds, a tool for building understanding where once there had been only fear and hostility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and greater risks. But tonight, as she prepared to leave the safety of her cell for an uncertain future, Zara felt something she had never experienced before. The profound satisfaction of fighting for a cause she truly believed in. The Kethvar military facility was everything David had expected, and nothing he had prepared for. The architecture was brutally functional, all sharp angles and reinforced surfaces designed to withstand assault. But what struck him most was the atmosphere of barely controlled tension that permeated every corridor. Warriors moved with predatory grace, their amber eyes tracking him with mixture of curiosity and suspicion. He walked between Zara and Captain Dexmar, officially designated as an observational witness for the interrogation proceedings. Unofficially, he was the first human ever granted access to a Kethvar military installation, a fact that had required authorization from the highest levels of their command structure. Stay close, Zara murmured as they passed a group of young warriors who stopped their conversation to stare. Some of our people have never seen a live human before. You're an object of considerable interest. David nodded, trying to project calm confidence despite his racing heartbeat. Every instinct screamed that he was in mortal danger, surrounded by beings who had been killing his species for decades. But he forced himself to remember that Zara had felt the same fear in Federation custody, and look how that had transformed. They reached a secure conference room where Commander Thalvin and Admiral Kexdal were waiting. Both senior officers rose as they entered, their postures reflecting the formal courtesy required when meeting with unknown aliens. Dr. Chun, Admiral Kexdal said in carefully pronounced Standard Galactic, "You have traveled far from your home to be here. Thank you for allowing my presence, Admiral. I understand this is unprecedented." "Many things about this situation are unprecedented," Commander Thalvin observed dryly, beginning with credible allegations that our own leadership has been selling warrior lives for profit. Dexmar activated the room's secure holographic display system, and once again the damning evidence filled the space between them. Financial records, corporate connections, tactical analyses showing the systematic meaninglessness of recent campaigns. But this time, the audience included officers with access to classified information that even Zara hadn't seen. "The Omega Sector debacle," Thalvin said grimly as he cross-referenced the corporate data with his own operational records. "We lost 1,200 warriors taking a series of mining platforms that were scheduled for decommission within weeks. And the Hellgate system offensive," Kexdal added, her voice heavy with controlled fury. 3,000 casualties to secure territory that was abandoned the moment we'd established control. David watched the Kethvar officers' reactions as they began to understand the scope of the betrayal. Their expressions shifted from skepticism to anger to a cold determination that was somehow more frightening than rage. "How long have you known about this?" Thalvin asked Zara directly. I first saw the evidence 4 days ago, Commander. Dr. Chen showed me the patterns and gave me access to verify them through our own military networks. Why? Kexdal's question was directed at David. What did humans gain by revealing this conspiracy? David chose his words carefully. Admiral, some of my people are profiting from this war, but many more are dying in it. If we can expose the manipulation on both sides, we might be able to build something better than endless conflict. You speak of peace as if it were achievable, Thalvin observed. I speak of peace as if it were necessary, David replied. Because the alternative is watching good people die for corporate profit margins until both our civilizations are bled dry. Kexdal manipulated the holographic display, focusing on personnel records and communication logs. If this evidence is accurate, then General Kethros and his inner circle have been compromising military operations for at least 5 years. The question, Dexmar said, is what we do about it. We expose them, Thalvin said immediately. Bring formal charges. Demand a full investigation. Through official channels? Kexdal asked skeptically. The same channels that have been allowing this corruption to continue. Then what do you suggest? We go public, Zara said quietly. Release everything simultaneously across our communication networks. Make it impossible for the compromised leadership to suppress or discredit the information. That would be mutiny, Thalvin pointed out. No, Kexdal corrected doubtfully. It would be loyalty to the Empire over loyalty to individuals who have betrayed the Empire. David leaned forward. There's something else to consider. We've been in contact with reform-minded elements within the Federation military. If we coordinate the revelations on both sides, a synchronized exposure that implicates corrupt officials from both species, Dexmar finished, making it clear that this isn't about human versus Kethvar, but about honest soldiers versus war profiteers. Thalvin was quiet for several minutes, clearly wrestling with the implications. The risk is enormous. If we're wrong, or if the evidence can be discredited, we'll all face execution for treason. And if we're right, but do nothing, Kexdal replied, thousands more warriors will die for lies while the real enemies of the Empire grow rich from their blood. David pulled out a secure communication device. I could put you in direct contact with Federation officers who are prepared to take similar risks. Captain Rodriguez of the Earth Defense Force, Commander Singh of the Colonial Marines, Admiral Chun of the Pacific Fleet. They all have access to evidence of corruption within human command structures. You would trust us with communication access to your own military personnel? Kexdal asked, clearly surprised. Trust has to start somewhere, David said simply. And it has to be mutual. Zara watched the exchange with growing amazement. Senior officers from both sides were seriously discussing cooperative action against their own corrupted leadership. The kind of interspecies alliance that had been considered impossible just days before. There's one more thing, she said, drawing attention back to herself. The neural collar modifications that allowed me to access this evidence. Similar modifications could be applied to other prisoners on both sides. We could build a network of verified witnesses with independent access to classified information. A shadow intelligence network operating across species lines, Thalvin mused. Brilliant. And completely insane. Insane situations require insane responses, David observed. Kexdal stood up suddenly, her decision clearly made. I'm authorizing the communication link to your Federation contacts. If they're willing to coordinate simultaneous revelations, we'll move forward with this plan. Admiral, Thalvin said carefully, you're risking your entire career. I've already lost too many good officers to risk anymore. My career isn't worth another warrior's life. Over the next 6 hours, they established secure communications with their counterparts in the Federation. Captain Rodriguez shared evidence of human officials receiving payments from the same corporate entities that had been manipulating Kethvar operations. Commander Singh provided tactical analyses showing that Federation forces had been sent into equally meaningless engagements. Admiral Chen revealed that she had been conducting her own quiet investigation into strategic inconsistencies. The parallels were impossible to ignore. Both species had been systematically manipulated into fighting profitable but pointless battles while the real architects of the conflict grew wealthy from the chaos. The corporate structure is surprisingly sophisticated, Admiral Chen observed during one of their video conferences. They've managed to embed profit incentives throughout the command structures of both militaries, which means removing a few corrupt individuals won't solve the problem, Kexdow replied. We need to change the incentive structures themselves. How do we do that? Rodriguez asked. David had been thinking about this question for days. By creating alternative profit centers that depend on cooperation instead of conflict. Trade agreements, joint research initiatives, cultural exchange programs, things that generate more wealth through peace than war. Assuming our peoples can learn to trust each other enough for such cooperation, Falvin said skeptically. We're trusting each other right now, Zara pointed out. If we can do it, others can learn. As the planning session continued, David found himself watching Zara with a mixture of admiration and concern. She had transformed completely from the captured warrior he had first met. Now she was a leader, a bridge between worlds, a catalyst for change that might reshape galactic civilization. But he also recognized the enormous burden she was carrying. If their plan failed, she would be seen as a traitor by her own people. If it succeeded, she would still face years of suspicion and hostility from those who couldn't accept the new reality. During a brief recess in the discussions, he managed to speak with her privately. How are you handling all this? He asked. Zara looked tired, but determined. Better than I expected. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm fighting for something that truly matters. Even if it means being seen as a traitor. I'd rather be a traitor to corrupt leadership than a loyal servant to lies, she replied firmly. Besides, I learned from a very wise human that doing the right thing often requires personal sacrifice. David smiled at the reference to their earlier conversations. And I learned from a very brave Kethvar that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite fear when action is necessary. We've both learned a lot, Zara agreed. The question is whether we can teach others to learn as well. The plan they ultimately developed was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its scope. Simultaneous releases of evidence across both species' communication networks, timed to prevent suppression by compromised leadership. Coordinated arrests of corporate conspirators on both sides. Public trials conducted jointly to demonstrate the interspecies nature of the corruption. Most importantly, immediate negotiations between honest representatives from both sides to establish frameworks for lasting peace based on mutual benefit rather than mutual destruction. The execution will require precise timing, Admiral Chen warned. If either side moves too early, the other side's corrupt officials will have time to discredit or suppress their evidence. And if we wait too long, someone might discover what we're planning and move against us preemptively, Kexdow added. They settled on a timeline of 72 hours for final preparations. Enough time to position all the necessary elements, but not enough for security leaks to develop. As the meeting concluded and the various participants began to disperse to their individual assignments, David found himself alone with Zara in the conference room. Are you ready for this? He asked. No, she said honestly, but I'm going to do it anyway. That's all any of us can do. Zara moved closer to him, close enough that he could see the exhaustion and determination warring in her amber eyes. David, whatever happens in the next few days, I want you to know that you've given me something I never knew I was missing. What's that? A sense of purpose beyond simple obedience. The understanding that enemies can become allies when they choose to see each other as people. The courage to act on my own moral judgment instead of following orders without question. David felt a tightness in his throat as he realized how much this remarkable being had come to mean to him. You've given me something too, Zara. What? Hope that the future doesn't have to repeat the mistakes of the past. That understanding is possible even across the deepest divides. That courage and compassion can triumph over fear and hatred. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, a human and a Kethvar who had found common ground in the most unlikely circumstances. The neural collar around Zara's throat hummed softly, no longer a symbol of captivity, but a reminder of how technology could serve understanding rather than control. Tomorrow would bring the greatest challenge either of them had ever faced. But tonight, They had the satisfaction of knowing they had chosen to fight for truth and peace rather than profit and war. The galaxy was about to change, and they had played a part in making that change possible. Outside the military facility, the stars shone with the same distant light they had cast for billions of years. But for the first time in decades, some of those stars might soon shine on worlds where former enemies worked together to build something better than the conflicts that had defined their past. The neural collar that had once bound Zara to human authority had become a bridge between species, proving that even the tools of oppression could be transformed into instruments of liberation when guided by compassion and understanding. In 72 hours, the entire galaxy would know that enemies could become allies, that corruption could be exposed, and that peace was not just a dream but an achievable goal. But first, they had to survive the next 3 days.